Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, this video has been blowing up and it crushed me. So this is by a channel I have not seen before called SciShow, and the video is titled, "Everyone Was Wrong About Genghis Khan." Now, at the school that I teach at in the history department, I'm known as the Mongol teacher because I'm interested in them way more than the other teachers, and I argue their importance to them all the time. Now, selfishly, I'm a little bit upset at potentially at this video because I don't want something that I have been preaching about Genghis Khan to be false. So I'm going to go hardcore copium mode here as we check this out. Wait, this is Hank Green? Okay, if he's going to be dogging on Genghis Khan, he's got to have beef with John. John and Crash Course World History, big influence on me as a teacher, obviously gets me and the students going because of the whole running meme. You know what I'm talking about, with them being the exception. In fact, I would be wearing my "We're the Exception" Crash Course shirt, but I lost it my last move. So I want to know if they have beef. But all right, time to turn on the copium. I'm going to be huffing it here. What have they been lying about my boy Genghis?
By all accounts, Genghis Khan got around. Not just around Eurasia, okay, which he conquered and ruled for decades.
Yes, he got around.
You know,
come on.
Like around. We don't know for sure how many children he had, but historians suggest it was a lot. So many, in fact, that some studies and pretty much all of the internet have claimed that a huge number of people in Central and East Asia today are his direct descendants.
1 in 200 in the world, 1 in 8 within the former Mongol Empire. Yeah, that's insane. Is he going to crash that bubble? I'm a little bit... Okay, copium mode. I got to turn it up.
But before you go around telling everybody you know who your great, add like 25 more great grandfather
I have the spirit of Genghis
let's
in
do
me.
A deeper dive into how this idea came about and how likely it really is.
See, the science nerds are ruining it.
Genetic change within a population typically happens a few ways. Natural selection and random chance both juggle the frequency of gene variants and how likely they are to show up in a given individual.
Right.
Certain genes could also turn up more frequently thanks to a prolific breeder passing on their DNA at a high rate, much like Genghis Khan was suspected to be doing. So if we want to know how many of his descendants are running around today, we have to trace the source of genetic changes
DNA
in human
haplogroups. All right, let's go.
The Y chromosome would be a great place to start with this because it's passed on by a single parent and does not swap its DNA with its paired X chromosome. That makes it an exception compared to autosomes, or...
He said the word exception. Cue it.
Non-sex chromosomes, which like to trade bits of genetic material with their matching counterparts just to keep things spicy when those genes are passed on to offspring. So unlike others, the Y chromosome stays intact over many generations, making it relatively easy to use to trace its ancestral origin. A 2003 paper looked at the DNA variation
this was
in the
the
Y chromosome of thousands of individuals from Central Asia to the Pacific. And their results showed that about 8% of their participants had the same Y chromosome haplotype. This means they belong to the same broad group. Their Y chromosomes might not be totally identical, but they all come from the same ancestor.
Okay, is this where he's going to say that that common ancestor was not the Mongols? Largest contiguous empire in history? You better have something to back this up. Here
8% is a lot, especially across such a large area. It's something the researchers would be more likely to see if they were working with a small, isolated population. But instead, it was like most of Asia, and their findings suggested a single lineage was responsible for those 8% of people. From there, the team used models to consider population dynamics and genetic mutation, and long story short, they traced this haplotype to a probable common ancestor about 1,000 years ago, likely in Mongolia.
Case closed. We did it. Spirit of Genghis is in us. Well, 8% of us. Well, that are from there.
And then they asked themselves, who's a person who lived around then who was incredibly reproductively successful? And they came up with Genghis Khan. After all, reigning from Eastern Europe to the Sea of Japan is bound to have some lasting influence on civilization, not just culturally, but also genetically. He is known to have had many wives and many concubines over the years, which some scholars say may have numbered in the hundreds. That said, we don't know how many children he actually had, as only 4 of his sons with his first wife.
The European style of the writings or the drawings of Asians always makes them look like Europeans. Like, look at that. Look at that thing. That doesn't look anything like the Mongols. If you actually look at them. I mean, okay, This is also you could tell this is pre-Renaissance as well, because there is very, very little in terms of perspective. Look how big the bed is compared to the tent. Yeah, they did have yurts and moved around like that, but come on. They're just holding the arrow. Do they know anything about Mongol culture?
As his heirs. And the thing is, we don't have any way of knowing if this Y chromosome haplogroup is actually connected to Genghis Khan because we don't have access to his DNA since his remains were buried in secret and have never been found.
Yeah, the story is it was one of those things. You probably heard this. A few rulers have done this in history. Like the founder of China, Qin Huangdi, he was buried somewhere. And then there's a couple rumors. There's a couple rumors that have come out of this. One is that they ordered that everyone that was there that was part of and would have known where he was buried. So engineers, whatever, people that worked there, had them killed so they couldn't tell where it was. And then also had those people have them killed to get it 2 tiers away from the original part of it. And then also there's a rumor that they may have diverted a river to cover over it. So they messed with the geography to hide it even further. But yeah, we don't know where he is.
Basically, the researchers were guessing. It was a decent guess, and credit where it's due, it got their work plenty of attention, but still a guess. Still, their research has been continually referenced over the years as proof of the great Khan's genetic legacy and the likelihood that you may be related to him.
There's not much in the way of engineering left from the Mongols because they were nomadic, but the stuff that people have made is just awesome. Look at that. That's so cool.
But a 2018 study challenged this link to Genghis Khan. They set out to take a closer look at the Y chromosome group described in the earlier study and compare it to closely related Y group lineages. They also ramped up the sample size to over 18,000 from 292 populations, collecting new samples from thousands of individuals on top of using previously published Y chromosome sequences. Their results told a different story. They determined this haplotype was older than previously thought, originating nearly 2,600 years ago, long before Genghis Khan was around. They also showed that people most likely to be the true descendants of Genghis Khan belong to a different haplotype. They did this not just using DNA evidence, but historical records that describe where Genghis Khan sent his troops, including his kids, but also people he was not related to. And the 8% haplogroup corresponded with the not related folks. They concluded that the big Y haplogroup instead represents the ancestral expansion of the Mongolic-speaking peoples.
So just ancestors of the Mongols? So they're cousins of him rather than in relation to him. I mean, that's basically how genetics work, but it all came through that same tree. Now, those people, there's a huge family tree that goes before Genghis Khan. The whole Turkic, in a way, family tree is massive. It goes all the way across Eurasia. It's huge. And basically all those nomadic peoples that have lived for thousands of years, all in Central, Northern Asia, and then expand out and then they create their own empires. I mean, that's how history has been, if you know anything about Eurasian history. So, okay, so he himself would have also been a part of that line. I mean, it's true. It's not like he would have created that chromosome, right?
So as one of the founder Y chromosome lineages in Mongol peoples, its success is due more to overall expansion of Mongol populations than one guy having a lot of kids. But also, while the Y chromosome can help us determine direct lineage, it does have its drawbacks. Y chromosome studies only trace ancestry via a single parent lineage, leaving out the other genetic half completely, so it can paint an incomplete picture of relatedness. That said, when we're not focused solely on sex chromosomes, our genetic material can be harder to track because chromosomes recombine all over the place. But there is a workaround. We can also trace ancestry by looking at identical by descent, or IBD regions. IBD regions are any single piece of DNA that is passed down from a common ancestor without being fully genetically reshuffled. These IBD fragments get smaller and more mixed up over generations as they get split up and combined back together in offspring. In the end, we are all made up of a patchwork of IBDs, and they can tell a tale of common distant ancestors as we look for shared patterns.
Seems like it's going to come down to this idea that it's more complex than we thought. And it's always easy to say that.
2020 study rather ambitiously attempted to trace the interrelatedness of all humankind using this technique. Good on ya. take on the big tasks, they compared about
Is this similar, by the way, to the Human Genome Project that was also around that same time? Was the findings that they found around Genghis Khan part of that? I'm trying to remember that original group because it was around that turn of the millennium, right?
17 million IBD fragments tracing common ancestors across 200,000 years. And what they found were 9 distinct human genetics regions: East and West Africa, Northern Europe, the Arctic, East Asia, Oceania, South Asia, the Middle East, and South America. And these populations shared way more IBD bits with each other than with neighbors from other regions. They also found that the center of Eurasia is the most genetically mixed geographic region in the world. And this makes a lot
because it's nomadic. It's nomadic. People didn't the geography there is not really well suitable for a lot of persistent agriculture and building, like in Mongolia. The vegetation is great for it. There's not the great rivers. Climate-wise, not great. That's why historically those groups that do survive there often and usually eventually migrate south into the great river valleys that are around Eurasia. So it makes sense there because they're always nomadic.
Sense. For thousands of years, this central region was a hotspot for extensive trading and migration, as well as conquests between otherwise distant and remote regions. So even though gene flow is relatively limited by geography, we still interbreed wherever we cross paths, and our genes move around. Okay. Back to Genghis Khan. These researchers did specifically look for genetic evidence of the Mongol Empire through this Middle Eurasia region, as well as other areas they occupied at length. They compared the DNA of Tatars, who they describe as the likely descendants of Mongols, to people living in the Middle East, Russia, and Europe. And despite these regions having been bordered,
in fact, you'll when you read Marco Polo's book, he refers to them as the Tatars, and that region, kind of like Western Asia, Tatars,
directly occupied by the Mongols at some point or another. Modern Tatars were more closely related to European populations than those in East Asia. Now, using modern Tatars as their Mongol DNA sample,
there was imperialism also, especially that came from Russia down into those regions, like in like Crimea, for example, which has the indigenous peoples of that are like Tatars. And so, yeah, there was a lot of imperialism from Eastern Europe coming that way.
It gets complicated because even though the term Tatar has historically been linked directly with the Mongol Empire, this may not be an accurate account of their very complex history and ancestry. But what the study did find was that present-day Central Asia was comparatively very tightly related to East Asian populations. Given that trading along the Silk Route had connected Eastern Asia with the West since the 2nd century, it makes sense that
so I was telling you about Tatar populations. If you see, I don't know if you could see my cursor very well, but if you know where Crimea is, you can see that there's these trade routes, these caravan routes that mix there, across the Black Sea, the land route, and then the one coming from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea. You see there's like a city there. It says Patakapaeum. Anyway, so you can see all of the mixture there of peoples. In fact, southern Crimea, again, you're talking about Tatars later too, was also a Greek colony. So multiple groups have come and gone there for those trade purposes. So it makes sense that an area like that would have a lot of genetic diversity.
Genghis Khan's empire wasn't
it's literally where Europe and Asia meet.
Main genetic influence between these regions. They were pretty connected already. That said, for a time, the Mongol Empire controlled 16% of the total landmass of Earth, so their expansion did play a major role in expediting trade exchanges between these regions, so they certainly still get credit where credit is due. What the study was able to show is that many groups of humans share IBD regions with many other groups of humans, no matter where they're from. That means even if your ancestors have largely stayed put generation after generation, there's still a great chance that you share at least some IBD fragments with folks from distant corners of the globe.
Of course. I mean, we didn't sprout out of the ground, dispersed across the planet, right? We have common origins. I think everyone understands that, right? Dude, look at this guy's drip. This is how you do nomadic lifestyle. Wear a sick purple jacket here. You got varied functional boots, a sweet like yellow belt, and then that like almost fedora kind of hat. Dude, that's the life.
It is especially likely that you share DNA with someone living in Central Asia, since they're the most likely to be carrying genes from, basically everywhere, whether that's South America or the Arctic Circle. We are all related, and we are all especially related to Central Asia. In the end, none of these techniques can tell you if you are directly descended from Genghis Khan, given that we don't even have his DNA. But they can tell you a lot about the wide range of populations you share ancestry with, no matter where in the world you are from. And at the end of the day, I guess there is still a chance that your DNA does in fact harbor some deep tie to Genghis Khan. But that's not simply because he had a lot of kids. It's because his empire existed at a time and in a place where people traveled to and fro for centuries. All that is to say, humans are humans. There's nothing that can truly wall us off into separate, distinct groups because we have such a rich genetic history woven together across the globe over hundreds of thousands of years.
Yes, my brother. Final thoughts. Okay, good. I can turn down the copium levels a little bit because basically just what it sounds like he said is that not that there's not ancestry that comes out of there. I mean, it's going to come from, there's a lot of Mongols. There were a lot of Mongols, right? And a lot of them practice the same type of progeny that Genghis Khan did. It was part of the culture there. But what it did say, though, is that we still have a common ancestry through that region. So through like the Mongol Empire, because our empire is going to spread. And also, the Mongols did a lot of intermarriage and a lot of interbreeding themselves. I mean, in fact, even in their western part of their empire, basically what was Persia, they blended so thoroughly that they just pretty much just blended into oblivion almost. When they even converted to Islam and again intermarried and all that. A little bit of a different story in Eastern Asia. There's a little bit more separation between the ruling Mongol elite and that's during the Yuan dynasty when the Mongols ruled China for about 100 years or so. But nevertheless, they were an empire that was built upon exchanging of culture and ideas and technologies. That is why that's often called the Mongols bring in the first real global age, minus the Americas, but you know what I mean? A first real Eurasian age, and built that because they conquered so much and then connected so much. So, okay, maybe you're not going through the Genghis Khan specifically, but it sounds like we still got all that Mongol in us. All right, thanks for watching today. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.